Hello, everyone. This is Ronnie from the Love Fruit podcast, and usually we just start the podcast straight away with an introduction to the interview. But we've got a little pre-introduction today, and the reason for that is that this episode is a little bit different from a few others, and I felt it was best to say something just before we start the official introduction with the interview portion. So today's interview is with Katharine Milton PhD, Professor Katharine Milton. She's a professor of physical anthropology. And the reason that I interviewed or wanted to interview Professor Milton was because a number of times she's been quoted by people in the fruitarian and raw vegan world as if some of the things that she say are quite in support of the idea that humans are more frugivorous and that primates are frugivorous and primates and humans shouldn't really eat a lot of meat or don't need to eat a lot of meat and so on and so forth. So I had an impression that maybe she was fairly supportive of the idea that perhaps humans evolved on fruit or to eat fruit and were primarily vegan and things like that. The reality is not as clear as that from speaking to her, and you'll see that in the interview. But I didn't want to edit anything out, so all of her opinions and ideas are fully in the interview. I've not edited anything out, and a lot of it doesn't might contradict some of the things that raw vegans or fruitarians wish to believe, or may contradict some of the things you've heard. But that's absolutely fine. I'm absolutely happy for that, for her ideas to get out there. So the thing I wanted to say though as well before we start the interview is that it's not until the very end that she mentioned to me that she'd had a stroke a number of years ago, and therefore there's a few times in the interview where she's struggling to find her words and struggling to get her ideas out, and I wasn't aware that she'd had this stroke, and she said to me she's not even a tenth of what she used to be in terms of her ability to talk and explain herself and think. So you might see a few times in the interview that she pauses to collect her thoughts and pauses to try and find the right word to use, and I just wanted to explain that in advance. So without further ado, we'll go into the interview. Thank you very much for watching and listening to the Love Fruit podcast. You can follow our newsletter at fruitfest.co.uk, and feel free to get in touch with us or share this with other people. If you've got any questions or queries, you can email us at info@fruitfest.co.uk. Anyway, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Love Fruit podcast. And today we have another fantastic guest, and it's Professor Katharine Milton, PhD. And Professor Milton is a professor of physical anthropology, has been working at the University of Berkeley in California since 1980, and has interests in the dietary ecology of primates, including human ancestors and modern humans, and has worked extensively on the dietary ecology of a number of indigenous groups in the Brazilian Amazon, and also has done a lot of field work with non-human primate species like howler monkeys, spider monkeys, woolly spider monkeys, and so on. And really excited and interested to hear more about what she's learned and what she knows about primates, about plant foods, about fruits, about the evolution of our diet. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to say in an introduction to yourself?
No, I don't think so. I hope I'll be able to speak on the topics you're interested in.
Well, let's start with howler monkeys. How did you start working with and studying howler monkeys?
In 1974, I went to Morro Colorado Island in Panama because I was supposed to go and do my thesis work in Madagascar.
Mm-hmm.
But Madagascar had a terrific upheaval about a year before I was supposed to go, and they closed it off. It wouldn't let anybody from the United States, I don't think, even come into their country. And so I needed to find a new place to work, and someone said, well, try Barrow, Colorado Island. It's a nice island. It's got different species of monkey on it. You might find something there. So I went to Panama, and I went out to Barrow, Colorado Island, and I met the howler monkeys and fell in love immediately. And I study them today. I go even now twice a year. I went in February of this year, but I haven't been able to go since because Panama closed its country to anyone coming in at all. And they've loosened it a wee bit, but I don't think they would let me in yet to study monkeys. So it's very difficult. But as soon as I can, I'll be going back to do some more work because I count them twice a year.
So the work you do is counting them and observing them, and
yeah, it's observing them. But I've also done quite a lot of work with their environment. You know, with the tree species that grow there, and the timing of their producing of fruits or leaves or flowers and so on and so forth. So you do a lot of work really with the environment as well as with the monkeys.
And what is it you said you fell in love with them? So what was it about the howler monkeys that you?
It was just so exciting. I'd read some papers on them, but they were just short little papers. There was one very long, wonderful paper that was written in the 1930s by Dr. C. Ray Carpenter, and he did really the first scientific study that I believe has ever been done on a non-human primate, and he did it in BCI on howler monkeys. And so I'd read everything he'd written, and but he only worked on them for about 5 or 6 months on and off, but he was there a lot, and he did some excellent work, and I read it. And then when I went to Panama and I saw the monkeys, I just thought, my word, there is so much to do here. You know, there's just endless amounts of things that I could look at. And so I got right in.
Amazing. And something, and I saw as well, because I actually came across a video one time of a howler monkey with botfly parasites.
Yeah.
And I believe that you actually you studied that as well, the relationship between.
Oh yeah, I did. I spent about 10 years on that, you know, along with other things, but that was a major focus of my work for about 10 years. And I worked with a man from Canada who was terrific, and he worked with me.
And is that a particular problem for the howler monkeys?
Yes, it's a problem, and it kills a certain number of monkeys every year, because if they get one infection, they can usually fight it off. But then in about 3 months, the botflies will lay their eggs again, and so the monkeys can be infested 2 to 3 times a year. And if they get infested a second time, that will really knock them way down and probably make a certain percentage of them die. The older monkeys, the teenage monkeys seem to go the most.
And why do they not? Because I know that primates kind of tend to like groom themselves and things like that. Why did they not pick them out? Or
they can't do anything because these eggs are very tiny, and the little tiny larva comes out and it sits up on a branch up in the tropics in the trees somewhere. And only when the howler monkeys go by, because this particular species of botfly is only found on the genus Alawata, so you only find them on howler monkeys. And the little tiny larvae try to get on the monkey as it goes by because they can sense instantly, that's a howler monkey, that's what we want. And so they get on and they go through the nose or the mouth or the eyes, and they go into the interior of the monkey.
Right.
And they migrate through, and most of them then poke a hole from the inside of the monkey out, and they stay in there for almost 3 months. And the last 2 weeks or so, they really put on the gas, and they get really big and heavy, and then they they've gone through 3 instars in the monkey, and the 3rd instar is when they get big and heavy, and then they fall out of the monkey, fall all the way to the ground, sometimes 30, 40, 50 feet or more, and they burrow into the soil, and they stay there for about 3 months, and then they come out, and they're males and females, and they mate, and then they put their eggs all over the place, and then the cycle starts again.
Yeah, pretty complicated then.
Well, it's pretty simple in a way. I mean, it just happens over and over and over. The monkeys are fine, and then they're not so fine, and then they're fine, and then they're not so fine.
So, howler monkeys, how would they compare to us as a primate? You know, obviously we're
People?
Yeah. How does it all come together? Where do we fit in?
They're not like spider monkeys. Spider monkeys are extraordinarily intelligent, fast, and
Right.
so on. Howler monkeys are much more sedate. Their brain is not as formalized as the brain of the spider monkey, and they just live their life like more or less like any other really good monkey species would live its life.
And am I right in thinking that the howler monkey primarily lives on leaves? Is that its primary diet?
Well, no, they live, when there's fruit around, they'll spend 50 to 75% of the day just eating these ripe fruits, but they always stop. And then they go and spend about the last hour of the day or so eating young leaves, lots and lots of, usually 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of young leaf, and they fill up on that as well. And so they're always eating some fruit, but they're always eating a fair amount of leafy material. I'd say 30% of the diet at least is leafy material, maybe 40%.
Yeah.
Even when plenty of fruit, because they need them both.
What kind of fruits do they have access to?
What kind of trees?
What kind of fruits? Sorry.
Oh, well, they really love fig fruit, especially much. And there were about 15 species of fig on BCI, and 2 in particular had gotten very, very abundant in the 1930s, because they cleared out all of the areas of BCI that had been used by people to grow crops and so on, and they moved all the people off the island too. And parts of the island were just wild and natural trees and so on, but other parts had been cleared for people to put in little plots to grow their food and so on. So they cleared everyone out. And then these 2 species of fig tree that have very tiny seeds were able to establish themselves, because there was not a lot of trees and leaves and stuff out in the areas that had been cleared. So these little seeds got in, and they evolved and became very, very large trees.
Mm-hmm.
And the howler monkeys were in Fat City for about 100 years. You know, they don't live 100 years, but different groups of howlers lived in these huge fig trees and just loved them. But unfortunately, the fig trees only live 100 to 125 years, and then they die. So they've all died out. There's almost none left. So the poor howler monkeys over the last 10 to 15 years have slowly decreased their group size from about 20 animals in a group to around 10 animals in a group. And they have to move around a lot more to find enough fruit species to carry them through. So they were in Fat City when I got there with all those delicious, huge species of fig tree, but now they're not at all.
So the environment and how that changes really affects their behavior and the group size and all that kind of thing.
It doesn't affect their behavior so much, but it does affect group size quite a lot, because I just think that they can't have a group of 20 and survive. They would have to split into so many little bunches, and they are a group-oriented monkey. They move in single file through the trees, one right behind the other, and so on. So they simply had to get into a smaller group size. And I think they still have the same amount of space that they were using. Maybe it's a little different now, but they seem to be about the same number of species of monkey on the island. Maybe there's about 10 groups less. Maybe there's not. But most of the groups are quite small now. I only know of 3 groups that have around 20 animals in the group. And they will get into one of the few big trees that's left in the area where they live, and they'll just stay in there the whole time. And the other groups that would like to get in there too, because they do have overlapping home ranges, so that one group can go into the home range of another group. Usually they avoid one another, but if there's just one huge tree with fruit, the other group will come in and it will sit quietly in some trees near the big tree and wait for the powerful group that's in there to get out, and they'll finally get out and go off to eat their leaves, and then the small group will run in and eat the fruit.
So that they're not so territorial about that, or are they quite territorial?
Pardon?
Are they territorial?
No, they're not territorial. They have a group. They have a given area that they use that's about 30 kilometers in 30, not kilometers, 30, I can't think of the word.
Miles?
No, not 30 acres, I guess.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of like, that's not the word I want, but it's the one that came into my head. They have about a 30 to 35 acre home range, but it overlaps with 2 or 3 other groups. One, here's yours, and then there's another over here, and another over here, and another over here. So usually at least 2 or 3 other groups are using portions of the home range of the other group. Mm-hmm. But they don't like each other, and they will get into a fight if one group comes in and tries to get into a tree or something. They may get fought by the group that's in the tree and so on. So usually they keep their distance. They don't want to come together because they will fight. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I had a perception that there was a big difference when you talked about spider monkeys and howler monkeys, that one of the big differences in terms of their intelligence.
Well, the spider monkey is just worlds more intelligent than howler monkeys. They have a group that has around 20 to 30 animals in it, I think, but on BCI the group was very small in the beginning because they had to they didn't have to reintroduce howler monkeys because howler monkeys had been there all along, and when they formed the Panama Canal, the island was created because the water got higher and shut it off. And so there were 2 or 3 species that were already there, but all of the spider monkeys had been hunted out or something. There were none in the entire area. And so they had to reintroduce them, and they reintroduced about 20 different little spider monkeys, but only 5 survived. And one of them was a male, one was a female that could never reproduce for some reason. So there were only 3 possible animals that could produce infants, and they produce infants, but the infant takes at least 3 years to get big. Whereas for a spider monkey, within a year, the infant is fine and able to go off on its own and so on and so forth. So the spider monkey has a much more intense intellectual life than the howler monkey.
And I guess my question is, is there any difference in how they eat, and does that affect their intelligence or how they evolved evolutionarily?
I don't think there's a difference really in how they eat, because they both like many species of ripe fruits that are natural fruits in the forest, and they also like to eat young leaves of many different species. Mm-hmm. And so I think basically they're the same, but the thing is the spider monkey will take up to 90 to 95% of the daily diet from fruit and only eat some select leaves at the very end of the day. Whereas the howler monkey always stops eating fruit at a certain time and begins to fill up on leaves, or it eats some fruit and then it eats some leaves, and then later it eats some fruit and it eats more leaves. So they're very different in their abilities.
And can you comment on how do they, do they eat in meals? Do they eat one big portion, or
they don't. They just eat one thing at a time. They just eat one species of fruit or one species of leaf at a time. and they don't usually go from tree to tree. Sometimes there will be times of year when many different species are producing new leaves or are producing more fruits and so on. And so they may then, yes, they get very happy in April. They are extremely happy because there seem to be trees doing all sorts of things, and they'll just wander about and enjoy, but they just go from one big tree to the next big tree, so that by the time a howler monkey, by the time it gets through one big tree, it's getting pretty tired already. It has to go through another big tree, whereas the spider monkeys just swing along with their hands and zip through the trees and go fast as the devil. So it's the howler monkey's just walking along, one foot after the next foot, and the spider monkey is just swinging through the trees with their arms and their feet pushing them. And they can go tremendous distances in a very short period of time. And they go from one area where there's a ripe fig or a ripe something else to another area. And they are just awfully good at finding any type of ripe fruits that are there. And they have a terrifically large home range. I mean, I think they really use about the entire island.
And do they eat at certain times of the day? Like what does their day look like? Do they wake up and eat straight away, or do they eat
they
late?
Wake up in the morning. I think the howlers want to eat fairly early. The spider monkeys may sleep a little longer, but I think generally they both get up and they go out and they feed, and then they rest, and then they feed again, and then they rest, and then if they need to go to other trees, the spider monkey may go to 5 or 10 different species of fruit tree, whereas the howler will be lucky to go to one. And then the howler will quit eating the fruit and start eating leaves, and eating them very seriously for an hour or more. And the spider monkey will just eat a few delicious young leaves at the end of the day, and that's it for him.
That's really interesting. It's quite interesting.
And they have the same body weight, but when you see them, the spider monkey's all long and lean like a green string bean, and the howler monkey is a very chunky, sort of walking along slowly sort of monkey. So they've just evolved very different strategies to get the same two main types of foods.
And what kind of time of day does the howler monkey change from eating fruit to eating leaves? Is it later in the evening?
I'd think about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's really fascinating, because obviously a lot of people that try and eat a raw food diet as humans, they experience that around about 4 or 5, they get a different desire to eat something different.
Yeah, well, it's probably they want their leafy matter.
So that's really.
And that's when the spider monkey always goes after its leaves too, but probably doesn't go around 5:30. But the howler monkey's also eating leaves as it moves through the trees, because there are many more species of new leaf for a monkey to eat in any given day of the year than there is delicious ripe fruit. So howlers are always feeding on some fruit leaves as they move along through the trees.
And it's young leaves that these monkeys, so young tender leaves rather than.
The mature leaves that have nothing in them that the monkey can use at all for the most.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really. Oh no, young leaves are tender and soft, and they have a high protein content, and they have sugars in them and so on. And the mature leaf is just a stiff fellow.
Have you ever tried tasting any of these foods that the monkeys eat?
I don't test very often, no, because they're not very tasty to me at all. The ripe fruit that we eat is so disgustingly changed by our breeding habits that it's just nothing like the wild fruits for the most part. I mean, some of the wild fruits are okay-ish, but 90% are icky.
What is it? Are they not very sweet, or they're bitter or sour, or what is it?
Well, they're sour. But they get maybe 10 to 15, maybe even 20% fruit at their most maximal stage of maturation
Mm-hmm.
before they become just ripe fruit.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can't remember what I was going to say.
Well, I guess what I was asking was, like, say the figs that they're eating, are they're not very sweet, or they're bitter, or what is it that's not flavored?
They're not bitter, but I think the spider monkey will go for some species of fruits that are bitterer than the howler monkey. It likes more spice in its fruit. But the howler really likes ripe fruit that is sugary and delicious, and that's what it loves.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you've also studied humans that lived in small groups. We'll get to that, but I'd like to. I've seen another interview with you. I've got some other questions that I'll come to. And I saw this interview, and you said that, and this was really interesting. You said that all animals basically broadly have the same nutritional requirements, and there's a kind of mistaken idea that we need something different to other animals need, or that you need to get
other animals that have normal digestive tracts and so on and so forth, because you know, if you're an insect, you can have a really unusual digestive tract and so on. But I think just talking about mammals,
yeah,
and we're mammals, you know, most mammals sort of require the same. Well, they don't in a way, because you take an animal like a cow that eats just fruit, leaves, and it has all of these different, it has 4 different compartments in its stomach. And digest it here and digest it there and do this and do that and do the other. And so there are many different ways that the words keep going out of my head. Damn, when they go out of my head, they really go out too. Mammals, yes, that mammals can live on.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk. I mean, you were mentioning this earlier about leafy greens being high quality proteins, and a lot of people wouldn't understand that, or wouldn't have heard that before.
Yeah, the young leaves are very proteinaceous.
But that's something that a lot of people wouldn't. You know, a lot of people think that plant foods aren't high quality protein.
Well, the leaves are.
Right.
Well, the young leaves that the monkeys choose to select for their diet are, yes. I think most young leaves in the tropical forest are probably fairly nutritious.
So let's get to. I mean, I guess I'm interested in what you would think about what you know about primates, and how that applies to human diets, and what would be a better diet for humans to eat, if we can learn anything from primates, because obviously we are in that category. I was just going to say something you've said is that the higher primates and apes, they primarily fill up on plant foods.
Yeah, they all do. I mean, there's prosimians, these little prosimians, they eat lots of, sorry, but it's really, maybe I'll have to finish this another time, but they eat primarily animal source foods, but they're insects and things like that. So that's the prosimians, but the simians, the spider monkeys, the howler monkeys, the apes, all those, I don't remember what I was going to say.
Well, we were talking about the idea of apes filling up on mostly plant foods.
Oh yeah, they do. They really do. They sure do. They eat almost 100% plant food, even the chimpanzee.
See, that's that's interesting, because if you go and if you look up the chimpanzee and you look up nature documentaries and stuff, we seem to get these images of chimpanzees hunting monkeys.
Oh, that's just something they do once in a blue moon.
Really?
Yes, really.
So they don't require meat for their diet or anything like that?
No, but I mean, they do go and they get, well, I just can't think of the words. They'll go into a nest of
Like eggs and things like that, and
well, eggs. Yes, they love eggs, but I'm talking about, insects. The
all right,
insects.
yeah,
They'll go and eat many. They'll eat a couple of different types of insects.
like termites and ants and things like that, and
Yes, termites and ants and things of that sort. They will go in and they will get the young, the young,
uh-huh.
the young,
yeah,
and eat them. And the female,
like the queen.
no, I'm talking about the female, the female chimpanzee.
Uh-huh.
Spends a lot more of her time trying to get those things than the males do, I believe. The males don't as much because the females seem to need it more, the nutrients that are in the
Yeah.
insects.
So they're primarily a plant-based diet.
Yes.
And
Yes,
even
absolutely.
and even the apes that are most like us.
Well, they're like us in some ways. They're not like us in other ways. They're not like us. They don't use their brains the way we use our brains.
Sure. If
But nutritionally,
yeah.
But remember, chimpanzee, a gorilla is enormous. It's huge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can feed on very low quality food because it's so damn big. It doesn't need to eat expensive, small, delicious things that you have to eat all the time. If you're a tiny body size, you've got to be eating almost constantly to keep things going. But if you're weighing 300 pounds or 400 pounds, you can just piddle along. But
Right.
the chimpanzee is much smaller. The chimpanzees weigh about, I guess, 85 to 110 pounds at the most. And so they kind of have to do what we have to do, basically.
Yeah. There's been some really kind of scare stories about chimpanzees attacking people, and them being very violent at times. Is that something you know anything about?
I don't know that much about it, but I would say that if you were around chimpanzees a lot and they got used to you, I mean, if you come on a chimpanzee and it's never seen you before, it might be scared and attack you or do whatever because it's frightened. But if you are someone who works with chimpanzees all the time, they might suddenly, at any time, they might decide just to turn on you and come after you. That's just the interesting thing about chimpanzees, and probably the same thing is true of orangutans and gorillas too, but I don't think so. They're so laid back. The chimpanzees are the fast, speedy ones, and the orangutan and the gorilla are much more slow, sedate, and the poor little orangutan just lives by itself, itself. It's amazing. Nobody around it all the year, except maybe if we'll go and find a girl once in a blue moon. And the female is alone by herself, except when she has a baby or she has an older infant, a younger infant or something like that. Well, that's for the most part what those two do. But the chimp is different.
And are these...
The chimp is like the spider monkey, only the brain of the chimp, I think, is more advanced than the spider monkeys.
And are any of these, how would you compare the anatomy, especially the digestive anatomy of these apes to humans? And is there one that's more similar to humans?
Very similar, except that the human being has decreased the hindgut considerably and increased the foregut because we're digesting almost everything we eat in our small intestine. And the chimpanzee does the best, the apes do the best they can with their small intestine, but they have a tremendous area in their hindgut. And we do not have a tremendous area in our hindgut because they have to ferment a lot of different things that they're eating to make enough
Right.
food to
Right.
survive. Yeah. So we're very different. Humans have a very large small intestine and a relatively small large intestine. Apes have a relatively large small intestine, but they have a terrifically large big intestine.
My something I saw was suggesting that in terms of our gut size and the area of the gut was closer to the primates that are closer to a higher fruit diet than a higher vegetation diet. That we would be closer to the camp of the animals that eat a higher proportion of fruit in the diet.
Well,
Is that
animals that eat a high proportion of fruit are usually pretty lively and move around a lot. And so you have to have a bigger brain because you have to be able to find the trees that have the special fruits that you need to eat and so on.
Mhm.
So that's true in a way.
And
But I bet they're all eating some leaves.
yes, yes. The other thing, I think you were asked before about the role of meat in the diet. I think you've got some interesting ideas on that. But one of the things you said is the idea that humans should eat a lot of meat is a ludicrous statement, and you don't see how any scientist could make such a ridiculous statement as that humans need to eat a lot of meat.
Well, I think some humans probably do eat a lot of meat. I mean, you know, the people that live in the frozen wilderness in the Arctic or
Hmm.
wherever, I think they probably eat a lot of meat, but it's frozen raw meat. Well, maybe it's not it's mammals, but it's sea
Hmm.
animals,
Hmm. Hmm.
not the other
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, so yeah, they probably do have to eat a lot, but I think they do okay. But I don't think you'd be very happy with it, but I think they can handle it just beautifully.
Hmm.
And they just chew on it and just chomp it down.
Hmm. So, so in your opinion, that we're not our physical anatomy wouldn't suggest that, or when it comes to how we've evolved as humans, do you think that the meat has played a significant role in our evolution?
I don't know exactly, but I think eating some meat has definitely increased the size of our small intestine because meat is digested in the twinkling of an eye. And so I think that eating animal source foods pretty consistently is part of most human diets, most
Hmm.
ancestral human diets. But I think very often they had to eat animals from the rivers or the oceans as well, or they had to eat insects and so on and so forth. I don't think they were always just running around hunting big game and eating big, massive amounts of big game or anything like that. I
Hmm.
think that's probably very difficult to do, even
Yeah.
under the best of circumstances.
Now, if we go to talking about humans specifically, there's a little bit of a mystery, I think, about as to why humans seem to have developed such a higher level, or what, as far as I know, like a higher level of intelligence to other apes, and also we're different in that we walk on two legs and different things like that. Um, what's your thoughts on why we're so unique, I suppose, and is it anything to do related to diet and what we had access to food-wise and things like that?
Yeah, I think it definitely is very, very strongly related to diet because I just think humans evolved because their brain began to do all the work. And the others have to move around and run and do many other things. But humans over time, I think, it keeps going out of my head. Humans evolved a lifestyle so that they could do anything. They could go up trees, they could dig in the ground, their brain got bigger and bigger, they got better and better, they can do everything. And
Hmm.
most other species of mammal can only do certain things. They have a repertoire of things that they do to get their foods. But humans, one set of humans can be eating almost nothing but frozen something in the Arctic, and another one can be eating almost nothing but, I don't know, leaves or something. You know, it just depends on where you live and what you've evolved to depend on in your diet. And so humans can eat anything. And that's just different from other animal species. They can only eat A, B, and C, or D, E, and F. You know, that's their big stuff. But humans just go nuts. We can eat anything. We can figure out some way to do it to anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's special about us.
We can eat everything as long as we're able to cook and use tools and things like that.
No, we could eat even raw things. I think we could eat raw meat. We could eat raw vegetables. We could eat raw. Anyway, I'm sorry, my buzzer went off.
No problem. So one of the ideas of what people seem to think is that there's a few different theories out there. One of them being that one of the reasons that fueled the expansion of the human brain was eating more meat. And then there's another camp that thinks it's eating more cooked food and learning to cook.
Fiddlesticks, it's nothing to do with eating more cooked food. Human brains were plenty big by the time they started cooking.
Oh, really?
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And because I think that, is it Richard Wrangham that talks about cooking made us human? What do you think about a statement like that?
Well, I don't think it's true. I think it embellished.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we were doing just amazingly. I mean, you know, just running around in the jungle and catching things and skinning them and eating them. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you think that having access to animal foods was a part of the expansion of the brain and so on?
I think that was an important part of human evolution for sure, because I think humans evolved in Africa, and I think they began to include animal source foods in the diet on a regular basis, which is not true of chimpanzees, orangutans, or gorillas. And I'm sure they tried to get animals whenever they could, but many times they can't get any animals. They hunt and hunt and hunt. They hunt for 8 hours and they get almost nothing. Then on the way back, they'll start looking in the water, trying to get some sort of fish or something like that. Or they'll start looking in trees to try and get insects and so on. So when they finally get back to their village after walking for 10 hours or more, they've got something to offer people to eat. But
right. So we're talking a bit more about the groups that you studied. So let's talk about that. So you studied closely, I think you said 6 groups in
the tropical forests of Brazil.
So these are human groups that were isolated from civilization, basically.
They really were. Yeah, they were, and maybe still are, but I don't think so now. But.
And what struck you about their life in terms of the contrast between how they lived and how people, obviously in the modern world, lived? Was there any comparisons? Could you see them as? Could you see the human similarities, or?
I don't know, because I haven't worked with lots of different types of human beings in the world today. So if I went to work in Africa to live with, well, I don't know, Africans. These are hunter-gatherers. They're in very small groups and so on. So I think about Africa. I think most Africans now have crops and they have large societies and so on. But the Brazilian Amazon and still is, although I understand they're clearing it away as quickly as they can now. But these people were quite remote and very small and just did their own thing. And so those are the people that I studied. But I think if I went out and lived with any modern human beings today, that they would be wearing clothes, they would be doing, everything. And although they might have very different diet than the American diet, which goes from A to Z and back.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming that you ate with them. But did you enjoy the
Oh,
food?
I never ate anything with them because, for one thing, I was much bigger than they were. And I thought, hell, if I come in and they think they've got to feed me, they'll run away. And so I brought my two things, my rice and the thing you have for breakfast, a ton of that. And I had a terrifically huge bowl of rice in the morning. I mean, a terrifically huge bowl of oatmeal
Yeah.
in the morning, a terrifically big bowl of oatmeal. And around 3 o'clock, I would light a little fire and try and cook my rice. And I'd make a tremendous amount of rice, and I'd eat it with 1 can of tuna, or just, all the stuff I brought in to live on. And so that's what I ate. And every now and then the Indians would give me a fruit to eat or something like that, which I would eat and enjoy. But basically, I just lived on the food I brought in myself, which was very simple, but which filled me up and kept me going. And I was as strong and healthy as a lion. And I was just eating practically nothing.
How small? You said they were smaller than you. How small were they?
Huh?
How small were they?
How small were the people? Well, the women were about 90 to 100 and maybe 5 pounds or so, and the men were about 110 to 125, something like that.
And were they
Yeah.
quite short as well?
They were short. They were shorter than I was. The men might have been as tall as me, but the women were much shorter. The women may have been 5 feet, 5 feet-ish. And the men maybe are 5'1" or 2, and the men may be about 5'6".
Sure.
Something like that. I'm just guessing.
And what was the staple diet did these groups all eat a similar kind of diet, or were they different depending on area? Or?
Well, the ones that I worked with all had a staple crop. They planted one thing, and they used that for their entire energy source. And then everything else they ate was fruit from the forest, or animals, or some other food that they got from the wild. So, but they had that staple, and I don't know how many centuries they had a staple crop. I don't think it's been a terrifically long time, but every group did have a staple crop that they did. 2 did manioc, 1 did, I can't think of the word, but they just planted one thing basically, and they ate it. Oh, and 1 actually planted potatoes. Potatoes, yeah.
So they actually planted as if they were doing farming?
Yeah, they'd clear a big area, they'd scrape it all up and everything, and then they'd put all their seeds in there, and then they'd watch it and keep it going, and when it got up, they would just use it, and they'd use it until, and then they'd start another one when that one was about to go down, and so on and so forth.
And did the men and women work together on all this, or did the men do hunting, or?
The men would clear it and clear the trees out of the way and get everything ready. And I guess I don't know whether the men and women put the seeds in, or just the women put the seeds in. And then I think generally the women sort of go after keeping things clean and keeping the leafy matter growing properly and so on. I don't think the men do that, because the men typically go off into the jungle every day to hunt for some kind of animal source food. And so the women are really more or less in charge of the plant crop.
And were the men good hunters?
Well, I think they were terrific hunters. But the animals they're trying to hunt have had many centuries of ability to figure out how to get away from them. But they will hunt anything.
So yeah, so they'd learned. I mean, they were farming independently. That obviously they hadn't been shown how to do this by anyone else. They were all doing this independently.
No, typically they grew one huge area, and I guess each individual used a certain percentage of that area for their food.
Hmm.
But they didn't have, this is just for me and my family, and this is just for him and his family.
Yeah.
They had a big field, and it was for all the women would be in there working.
And they would all stay in one place. They weren't nomadic.
No, but at one or two times, well, one time of year for sure, they do get into groups, maybe two or three couples, I guess you could call them, or something, and their children would get together, and they would go into the jungle, and they would stay there for a couple of weeks, moving around, and because then you can get a lot of animal sourced food. You can kill a lot of game and stuff because everything's big and fat and happy. So they would go into the jungle and do that, and then they'd come back and move back into their little thing that was just made out of straw, and might have a little roof made out of leaves of some sort on the top, and they would move back into that.
Yeah. So going back to some of the things we've been talking about, one of the things you're saying is the idea that humans should eat a lot of meat is a ludicrous statement, but you do think that humans would have always used an amount of meat, and that would have distinguished us from other primates. Is that the way you think about it?
No, almost all primates eat some sort of meat. They might eat little tiny animals of some sort, but I think every single species out there eats some sort of animal source food every single day. Yes, sir.
So, but you think that would mostly be insects, or
it might be insects for the smaller ones. Yes, insects and the larvae of insects and things of that sort. But I think when a primate gets to be about 10 pounds or so, it starts eating small things, small mammals, little. I can't think of the words.
Yeah.
Tiny little animals that run around in the jungle, and they know how to catch them, and they know how to. Yeah, but the smallest monkeys probably take quite a lot of their food from bugs and things of that sort. But if there's something they can catch and kill it and eat it, they'll catch it and kill it and eat it. You can be sure they will.
So, do you, from what you've looked at with this, and I'm not sure if you are particularly, if it's your area, but do you have any concept of what an ideal human diet might be? Especially in the context of a world in which there are so many health issues that seem to be related with the kind of diet that people eat in the modern world.
I think people should just eat a lot of fresh fruit, and I can't think of the right word for the the starch.
Starches,
but certain starches, and then all of the other foods that you can use that are plant-based. And then I think it's probably a good idea to at least 3 times a week to eat some sort of animal source foods of some sort. But I suppose now there is you can buy all of these things to fill in your diet. If you try to be just a frugivorous person, you can make it, but I think it's kind of silly, because I think you need to take in your proteins and your this and your that and the other, and you can take that from many types of plant foods, and it's kind of ridiculous to run around just trying to shovel in fruit all day long, because the only thing that I know that shovels in a lot of fruit is the spider monkey, and it's pretty busy.
So well, from my perspective as someone who's interested in the fruit diet and eating a more frugivorous diet, let me make a few statements, and you can debunk them or tell me what you think, if it's right or wrong, or there's any truth to it or whatever. So a lot of people that eat a lot of fruit and are positive about that, their belief is that actually the fruit and having access to more fruit played more of a role in the evolution of the human brain getting bigger than eating meat or eating cooked food. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I think fruit played a huge role, and I think that getting a bit of animal source food played a big role too, at least for the ones that were evolving there in the jungles of Africa. So I don't think people were living on nothing but fruit. I really just don't think. I just don't think any of them were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't see how they could have.
Yeah.
Wild
So
fruits are up in the trees. They're really hard to reach. The leaves get mature and you can't eat them. You can't cook them. And the fruits are up in the trees, and the most tree species in the tropics produce a crop once a year or once every 2 years, and they produce it for maybe a month to 3 months, and that's it. Forget it. So you're running around from this species to that species trying to get enough fruit to eat and so on. I think it's very, very difficult. And when you look at non-human primates, you don't find many non-human primates that are getting most of their diet from fruit.
apart from chimpanzees and bonobos and orangutans.
Chimpanzees and bonobos don't get most of their food from fruit. Yes, they do. They do. And
Okay.
spider monkeys do.
And orangutans?
Spider monkeys do.
Mm-hmm. But there's primates that are primarily frugivorous,
Frugivorous. Yeah.
and their diet, like bonobos, chimpanzees, they're closer to 95%, 97% fruit. Is that not true?
I don't know, because I'm really just not up on what many other species of primate are eating these days, but I think they just eat anything, I'm thinking about the ones in India.
Right.
Species there. I really just can't comment because I haven't thought about it in such a long time that it's just not coming into my head.
Sure. Well, what I'm also interested in is you were talking about spider monkeys earlier on, and the idea that animals like a spider monkey, they need to be able to travel wide distances. They need to have,
Under chimps.
yeah, and do they have to memorize the map of the forest and know where different trees are and things like that?
Yes, they do. They do. And they know. And they know.
And so that's a large part of their intelligence.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like we have something similar to that in the way that our brain is structured?
I think now I really don't know anymore, because I think we just go to the grocery and get a bunch of rubbish that's all in packages and that is not really very good for us, and then we bring it home and eat it. And I don't think when I was younger, I would cook meals. I would cook these delicious meals. I'd have people over to dinner. I haven't done that in 30 years, I bet. Well, 20 anyway. I mean, I just maybe once in a blue moon I'll have people over and cook something. But I can't remember what we were talking about.
Yeah. Let me ask you now about, like, obviously you have a passion for the howler monkeys and these animals, and I would like to know about, in terms of conservation, how are these animals doing, and primates generally, in terms of their survival in the wild and so on? Does it look good for them, or is it difficult, or what's happening?
I think it's been very, very poorly, very poor for every animal, every monkey, every chimp, everyone out there. I think it is dismal.
Oh,
Unless
really?
it's in a protected reserve or something like that, and it's a huge reserve, and they're going to keep it, and they're going to make sure that they have access to it and that people don't come in and kill them, they're finished.
Really? That's quite sad.
It's bad. It is bad. Everywhere I read about it, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It's terrifying.
Is there anything that can be done about it?
Well, yes, there's plenty that could be done about it if people would just, in each country, would just get together and say, okay, we're going to take a huge area, we're going to call it a nature reserve, we're not going to let anything in it. They have done that in, I think, every country on Earth has done a few, but I think, I just think that the few that they have compared to what was there is nothing. It's just nothing for the most part. I mean, I'm sure there's some huge areas in some countries.
Yeah, so, and it seems a shame because I like to think that the primates and the apes can teach us a lot, and if they go extinct, then we lose a connection maybe to our own past.
It just breaks my heart to think that we would lose all of our primates or all of our great apes. I mean, it just really just doesn't seem real to me. It's so awful, and it's just going on constantly.
What's it like when you interact with primates in the wild? I mean, do you feel like you can communicate with them in some way, or do they seem intelligent? Or
with the spider monkeys a bit, because their spider monkeys are very smart, and they're funny, and they'll gang up on you if you're by yourself, the males, and they'll push you, and I'll go out. I think, God damn it, I'm going to have to jump in the lake to get away from these guys. But then usually someone who's angry will come running up, and then the monkeys will come back again. But I think they're just playing in a way. I don't think they would really attack me, but they want me to fall into the lake. That's for sure.
Interesting. So let's talk about what are you doing now? What do you work on at the moment, and where do you work? And do you teach? Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing now?
I was teaching until, well, I had a problem in 2016, and toward the end of 2016, I had a problem, and it affected my brain. And so for a couple of years, I really couldn't even talk very well. And so now, as you can see, my voice has come back somewhat, and my ideas have come back somewhat. But believe me, this is 1/10 of what it was before I had that stroke problem. So I'm just not myself anymore. I just can't. I used to be able to think and put things together and but now I just can't. You know, and certain words, it's very hard for me to remember what they are. I can see them in my brain, but I can't make them go into the part where you say it. And it's just a very boring thing.
Terrible.
So I've done the best I could for you, but believe me, I'm just a fraction of what I was until the end of 2016, when I had that damn stroke. It was a blood clot in my heart, and it broke off and went into my brain. But lucky for me, I was with my cousins in Atlanta, and they called and got the ambulance to come within 20 minutes, and it took me to a place that was only about 15 minutes from their house. And so, and they called my brother, whom I had never spoken to on the phone practically in my life. He never answers the phone. He answered the phone. They said, "Can we do this to your sister?" And he said, "Yes, do whatever you have to do." So they did it. And so the next day I was okay again as far as my heart was concerned. But my brain had been affected because I was out cold after about a minute, and I didn't come back out the next day. So anyway, so that's all very boring. And that's why I wasn't sure that I would be able to give a talk to you today, because I know that my brain is just not, the language even that I use is not as sophisticated as it was before I had my stroke. So I thought, well, I could maybe answer a few questions or something, but don't think that I'm anything like a normal scientist.
Well, but thank you very much for giving us the time, and I thought you gave some great answers, and I'd like to hear your opinion, because obviously you've got a lot of an amazing amount of experience. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure, and just use what you can, and if you can't, just throw it all away.
No, it was really good. I think it was a lot of challenging ideas and good stuff. So I'll just finish it off by saying to all the people that are listening or watching, if you want to learn more about this podcast, you can go to fruitfest.co.uk/podcast, and you can follow us there, and you can share this with other people. And thank you very much for joining us today with the Love Fruit podcast.
It's been a pleasure, believe me. Okay, and I'm going to go up and click on it now, and I'll go away, right?